And we had Jean Guerrero, who wrote this fantastic biography on him, Hate Monger, who
Oh my
traced
God, I
the
read
steps.
it for this piece. Yeah.
So yeah, so we'll break it all down. It was a great piece, and I'll link to it once I have this up later today.
All right. Thank you so much.
So you want to go back to Nikki, not Nicole.
Yeah, Nikki.
I'm joined by Nikki McCann Ramirez, Nicole McCann Ramirez, who goes by Nikki, a fantastic reporter for the Rolling Stones, and also a podcast host of.
American Friction.
And she is on Blue Sky and social media. I'll link to it. But she has a fantastic article that came out on the Rolling Stone just 2 days ago, co-authored by a friend of the left hook, Aswin, and another reporter. What was their name?
Andrew Perez, our politics editor.
Andrew Perez. It's a great, great deep dive into Stephen Miller. What has radicalized him, his intentions behind the scenes, how he's running the show, how he operates, how other Trumpers think of him, and every single opportunity that I can get, as those who know who are loyal watchers and readers of the Left Hook, I try to talk about Stephen Miller because I have said for the past 8 months that one of the shadow presidents is Stephen Miller. The other one is Russell Vought. Russell Vought is a white Christian nationalist, the co-author of Project 2025, and Stephen Miller is an out-and-out white nationalist extremist. You can say it. These are his views, his book, his rhetoric, the books that he reads, the conspiracy theories that he promotes. And this guy is the guy who is running the show when it comes to the invasion, the National Guard. He's the one who came out in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's murder on Fox and said the last words that Charlie Kirk told me were to, go after these radical left-wing organizations. He's the one
We're to
who's
do more
invoked.
fascism.
Yeah, he's the one who's invoked the Alien Enemies Act. He's the one who says that we're under invasion. We're not. He's the one who has tried to use the word insurrection, right? So he is a scary mother effer. And Nikki did a great breakdown. So Nikki, am I being hyperbolic when I say the words co-president Stephen Miller?
No, not at all. I think it's been abundantly clear, even like shortly into the interregnum, shortly into after Trump lost in 2020, that the primary goal for Trump of getting back into the White House wasn't necessarily like a really heartfelt desire to complete all the policy initiatives that he didn't get to during the first administration. The primary function of his campaign for 2024 was to get off the hook for the criminal indictments and sort of that like sense of revenge that he has. We know that Donald Trump, he's not a policy wonk. He's not the kind of guy who's going to sit there and spend a lot of time authoring executive orders, like talking with his cabinet about, what laws can be bent in order to achieve what on immigration. He has his very specific end goals. He likes the pomp and circumstance of being president. He likes the attention. He likes sort of the TV production of the presidency. He doesn't like the policy side. So I think the way people need to understand Miller and the second Trump administration is that the Trump presidency is a vehicle for the sort of most hardline survivors of Trump 1 to achieve what they felt they didn't get to do this time around. And I think Miller, the way I see him and the way I see him in the context of from like Trump 1 to Trump 2.0 is that this man is a survivor. We saw over between like 2016 through 2020 to 2024, so many incredibly prominent Republicans who were sort of the faces of the party get purged, kicked out of the movement, fall from grace with MAGA, develop these insane rivalries with the president. And Stephen Miller managed to come out of it virtually unscathed. And I think the reason that is because Miller, he's willing to do whatever he needs to do to stay in the good graces of the president. This is not a man who adopted the policies of the MAGA movement to make himself fit in. Miller is among the people who I would count as like a hardcore true believer, like the Marjorie Taylor Greene types of the world, who this is a man operating from conviction, who is willing to throw anyone under the bus who he needs to, who has now developed, as we talk about in the piece, a reputation for himself as someone who will ream you out and take your neck if you're not moving the way he wants you to move. And when you have a president like Trump, who's not interested necessarily in the nuances of governance, that leaves a void for someone like Miller to come in and effectively run 3 cabinet-level agencies. And we lay this out in the piece: the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Defense. All 3 of which, primarily DHS and DOJ, are run by sort of TV personalities who also don't have a lot of policy interests. Pam Bondi's a little different. Like, she was an attorney and a prosecutor. She's got a little bit more chops there. But Miller is effectively where people kind of make fun of Marco Rubio and say he has too many jobs. Miller actually has all the jobs. He is the person effectively controlling the three most powerful branches of the US government to his own end. And President Trump is happy to let him do it because twice a week, Miller provides him with a package of executive orders that he gets to sign. He'll get to stump on him on the campaign trails. He'll give a couple sound bites to reporters. And he doesn't really have to deal with the actual mess of governance. He has a cabinet and a shadow president that'll do it for him.
And, I've used the word shadow president for Stephen Miller. And, we could talk about DHS and we could talk about the attorney general, but I'm so glad you mentioned the Department of Defense because we have Pete Hegseth completely out of his depth. Fox host, what was reported is that people in the military have lost faith in them. They don't want to work with him.
Yeah.
And I want to take it back to Signalgate. Everyone's forgotten. I keep the receipts. And when it came to Signalgate, for those who don't remember, the Trump administration used Signal, an unsecured site that the Pentagon warned them could be hacked and was insecure, to share literally military plans and strikes. Pete Hegseth copy-pasted the military plan and strike in Yemen, which could have been intercepted by our actual, enemies and actually been used to attack our soldiers. And then there was a back and forth, if you remember, on Signal between J.D. Vance, the vice president, Donald Trump, not part of it all, the president. So they did this completely without, and Donald Trump said, "What Signal? What was that?" And then they got a word from the White House. J.D. Vance said, maybe we should wait on this strike. And then they got word from the White House. So the White House says, go now. And to me, the White House and the person saying that was Stephen Miller.
100%. Stephen Miller popped into the chat and he said, no, this has been approved by the president. Basically, like, shut up, get in line. And through our reporting, that is what we found pretty consistently, that whereas it's been dissected to death, but during Trump 1, you had a lot of reports of sort of these like established people who came sort of from like the Bush era, who were sort of Republican figures in and of themselves, who were hoping that by participating in the first Trump administration, they could sort of rein in the impulses of the president. And I think writing this piece, I thought a lot about the anecdote from around January 6th, where Trump is trying to find a way to usurp the electoral college certification. They're testing out all these legal theories. And the White House counsel at the time, Pat Cipollone, comes out and says, no, sir, you cannot do this. Like, this is illegal. It's unconstitutional. And Stephen Miller is the kind of man, and we've reported this out in the piece a bit, where when the roadblock, the speed bump of the Constitution, of due process, of habeas corpus crops up, he doesn't pull a Pat Cipollone. He doesn't turn to Trump and say, sir, my guy, my friend, you can't actually do this. He calls in the people from the agencies, say ICE, and yells at them and tells them to get it done, that if they want to keep their job, they will figure out a way to do it. And I think Miller, quite intelligently, during sort of the interregnum, founded America First Legal and established himself as sort of the preeminent conservative force for the litigious enforcement of GOP culture war priorities. This is an administration that sees the law as optional at this point. And the primary enforcer of that worldview is Miller. And I want to get into it in a little bit, because also I was thinking about it this weekend, because I think Friday was 9/11. I think a lot of what Miller is doing, particularly on the immigration front, he's modeling after sort of the post 9/11 extrajudicial criminal system that was created under the guise of combating terrorism. So much of Miller's worldview was shaped in the post 9/11 world. He was a very young man when 9/11 happened. We wrote a little bit about it. There's a great book called Hate Monger, who the author of the name of that we were just talking about them.
The hate, Janine Guerrero.
Yeah, Guerrero, she wrote this wonderful book exploring sort of like the origins of Stephen Miller, how he became who he was, but like the post 9/11 world, where Miller was confronted with sort of this ephemeral other that had attacked the United States and then put in a position where every lever of power in the government was sort of like enforcing these patriotic cultural principles. I think that is the moment in time that we need to focus on to understand who Miller is. This was a man who, in his very formative political years, saw the United States government undermine its own laws. The creation of Guantanamo, the Patriot Act, all of these laws
I
that huh? Oh, yeah, ICE, the creation of ICE and DHS, all these laws that sort of usurp Americans' right to privacy, to due process, that rewrote what the US government could do to someone in detention. The political formation of Stephen Miller took place during that time period. And if you look at what he's doing now in terms of immigration, not only are they were trying to reopen Guantanamo, but they are using a lot of the post 9/11 framing of like anti-terrorism to apply those same principles to immigration, to Palestinian people who speak out against Israel, to anyone who criticizes Charlie Kirk. They are using sort of these rights that were so slowly stripped away from us in a way that, you know, 20 years, 24 years on, you'd think it would have cooled down. But no, for Miller, all that information was sort of this fertile trove of experimental legalese that he now gets to play with. And from everything we've heard from sources within the White House, people who knew him, he's having a great time right now. And people in the White House are scared of him.
Yeah, we'll get to how he actually operates, but let's take the DeLorean back. I think it's very important. I had a conversation with Spencer Ackerman, who wrote a fantastic book called The Reign of Terror, where he
Mhm.
talked about a through line between 9/11 and America's choices and how it conducted the war on terror and how it led to not just Trump, but Trumpism. We
Yep.
mentioned ICE. ICE was created, folks, after 9/11. Patriot Act was after 9/11. America chose, and specifically Americans chose to voluntarily trade their civil liberties for the feeling of safety to go after the Muslims. And Stephen Miller now has taken that and said, let's go on steroids. Let's use this against the American people. That's what I'm older than you, Nikki, but I marched against the war and we tried to warn people that you are creating a military industrial apparatus that in the wrong hands, well, while you're terrorizing and killing all these brown people in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Yemen and other folks, this can be used against Americans, and Americans like we don't care. That's fine. So Stephen Miller has taken that and is now unleashing the DHS against innocent American residents, citizens. It doesn't matter. Can you talk to us about the radicalization that happened? And specifically, I'm so glad you mentioned that quote about how literally he comes back one summer and becomes a true believer. And ninth grade Stephen Miller is the 39-year-old white nationalist that we see today. What happened?
It was 9/11. I think it was he starts a relationship with a conservative radio host. Crap, I'm forgetting his name. We don't really touch too
David
deeply on it
Horowitz?
in there. David Horowitz, and then Larry Elder. He's on the Larry Elder show a ton. But Stephen Miller, by all accounts, grew up in a very liberal, like the joke is like Santa Monica fascist, grows up in a very liberal family in a very liberal state, a very liberal part of that state. And he gets to high school, 9/11 happens, and from the accounts we have, like I said, that was an incredibly sort of traumatic incident for him. We describe one anecdote from a former classmate of his who's Latino, and he says that one summer, Stephen Miller comes back and is like, I can't be friends with you because you're kind of foreign, and I don't like that. And at the same time, I think you start seeing Miller view his own kind of xenophobia and his obsession with sort of like white identity as a form of counterculture. There's the anecdotes that exist in the world, him like running for student government and in a campaign speech complaining that like why should he have to pick up his own trash when they have,
Yep.
minority custodians to pick it up for them. Um and he becomes sort of a point of mockery in his high school and also at Duke University, where he eventually goes to college. People who are kind of see him as this sort of clownish, almost performative racist who is, even for a time and a period where racism and xenophobia were so prevalent in the culture, because we cannot forget that like the post 9/11 world, I think like really, I can't even say up until the Obama era, because then there was like a whole new form of racism that emerged in the Obama era. But like the post 9/11 world was an incredibly racist, incredibly xenophobic place, a place where the United States and the culture at large was really primed to reject Muslims, was primed to reject sort of any sort of idea that there was an incursion of foreigners within their country after this like extremely traumatic national event. And that even in that climate, Miller is seen as clownish. He's seen as just going so far beyond the pale of what is socially acceptable that he becomes the butt of a joke and the joke in a lot of his social circles. This continues to when he starts working in Congress, when people are just kind of like, he's this weird, creepy dude who's awkward with women. They start spreading these kind of malicious rumors around him. One of the anecdotes we have in the piece is that people, when he was a staffer in Congress, would kind of joke that he had like creepy Annabelle dolls on his desk. The White House denies this. But he's not well liked. And that follows him all the way through the first Trump administration, where Miller, he's reported to be the architect of the Muslim ban. He's trying to get really involved in national security issues, but at the same time, he's encountering a lot of resistance from these like establishment, capital R Republican figures that have brought themselves into the Trump administration. He's kind of kept on the margins. In that sense, I think he's kind of in a similar situation to Kash Patel, although he is definitely more successful, where he's in the orbit, he's got some successes, he's got a leg in where he needs to. He manages to survive the purges, but he doesn't get to do everything that he wants to do. Obviously, the Muslim ban engineers like widespread backlash. A lot of it is eventually repealed. He doesn't get to live out the anti-immigrant deportation fantasies that he comes into the administration with. And I really do think he spent the 4 years between Trump 1 and Trump 2 buckling down on the legal strategy of how he was going to make it happen. We have the anecdote, and this was my colleague Swin, who was in Florida on election night and saw this. Miller on election night, when Trump's victory is announced this past year, having sort of this crowning moment where everyone's celebrating the president, but all of a sudden you have throngs of people coming up to Stephen Miller being like, I'm so happy for you. This is going to be great for you. This is everything you've ever wanted. And that moment, which I think Swin describes quite eloquently, of Miller having that realization that the world is opening up to him. He is the most powerful unelected bureaucrat in the United States, if not the world right now. He has the power of 3 cabinet agencies. He's unconfirmed. He has the ear of the president. He is in a situation where he can essentially hand Trump a slip of paper, and the president probably won't read it. He will just sign it.
We've seen it on TV. He goes, when am I signing? Okay. We've literally seen Donald Trump do that. He has only sat for, I think, 13 or 14 security briefings, and then he stopped. He spent 20% of his presidency so far golfing. He has slept publicly in these events. He's sick. He's 79 years old. He seems completely disinterested. Him and his Tweedledum sons and family have made $5 billion off of crypto. He's promoted crypto legislation, complete conflict of interest. Can you talk to us about when it comes to the National Guard being unleashed? And let's use LA as the focal point, how that was all Stephen Miller.
This has been a fantasy of Miller's for a really long time. Essentially, in the first Trump administration, when the George Floyd protests were taking place, I'm sure I don't need to explain to anyone what the Republican reaction was to those protests. You obviously had, and it had like the Tom Cotton op-ed where he, called for the government to send in the troops. Trump sort of fantasizing about shooting rioters in the leg. Stephen Miller was all about it. There is an existing legal principle in this country. It's posse comitatus, where you cannot have the military, federal troops do civilian law enforcement at a local level. It's a violation of states' right. It is essentially, it's fascism. It's straight up fascism when you have the executive branch controlling civilian law enforcement. There are very limited circumstances where that can happen. Usually it involves declaring sort of martial law, or in moments where there is such a severe breakdown of society that someone needs to be sent in to reestablish law and order. And historically, the bar for that has been quite high. Obviously, in Los Angeles, I think the last notable instance of the National Guard being sent in to quell civil unrest was during the Rodney King riots.
Yeah, 92.
And Stephen Miller, in response to the George Floyd protests, was gunning for it. They wanted to send in the National Guard. Trump seemed to consider it at certain points in time. And then once again, you had sort of this cadre of establishment Republicans sort of, I don't like the term like sensible Republicans, but more sensible than the current Republicans pump the brakes on that, say that's probably a violation of civil rights. That's probably a violation of several constitutional principles. We cannot do that. This time around, I think you're seeing a very marked pattern in the administration where incidents of public note, such as, the limited protests we saw in Los Angeles, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, are being used, particularly by Miller, as Reichstag fires to take leaps and bounds into this erosion of civil rights that we've been discussing. Los Angeles was Miller's brainchild, this idea that the president can go into Democratic cities, and let's be clear, they're targeting Democratic cities that are primarily populated or have large populations of people of color.
Yeah.
The idea here is by no means an enforcement of law and order. This is not a law and order practice. It is an enforcement of authoritarian pageantry. It is the administration going to prominently Democratic cities and saying, hey, myself, Stephen Miller, the president, and Donald Trump, the president of the United States, can override your elected officials. I have more power than the democratic and constitutional principles that theoretically uphold this country. And I can come into your communities, take your people, send in the troops, arrest you without notice or, due process, detain you indefinitely, and remove you from this country. Ostensibly, all of this is taking place under the, guise of immigration enforcement. But, for example, what happened in DC, that was not immigration enforcement. There was immigration enforcement actions within the context of the takeover in DC, but the primary function was to go to this primarily Democratic city that was chosen in part because it exists in this very unique sort of federal legislative gray area where it's controlled by Congress, and show the country that the president and his cronies are willing to exert that kind of power over their political enemies. And this was a tactic that was pioneered. And he's talked about it openly, that they can do this. They can say it's for law and order. They can say that they're cracking down on crime. And Democrats, if they come out and say, actually, this is a violation of my civil rights, you're superseding my own elected officials, which is unconstitutional. If Democrats come out and say that, well, Miller's answer to that is, oh, are you pro-crime?
And also what he said is, we're under invasion, we're not. The invasion justifies him invoking the Alien Enemies Act.
Yeah.
The Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked in times of war, which was used during World War II to intern innocent American citizens of Japanese descent. He said that he could suspend the writ of habeas corpus, and says, which allows anyone in America, to if you are detained, to actually protest your detention. So he says, no, we can suspend a habeas corpus. We can use Alien Enemies Act because we're under invasion. The Supreme Court, which has pretty much batted 1,000 for Donald Trump, said, actually, you can't use the Alien Enemies Act. Stephen Miller said, I don't give a shit. I'm going to do it. And then he unleashes ICE on LA. And can you tell us about his need for quotas, how he's on top of, you said, because you mentioned in the piece with people who reported that they're scared of him. He's obsessed. He works more than anyone. He's a true believer. And he's the one literally auditing people who are not cracking skulls enough. The
100%. There was a report a couple months ago where we mentioned it in the piece, where Miller essentially called in the head of all these ICE regional offices and tells them, you are not getting rid of enough people. And the response a lot of the ICE officials had was, well, the administration for months now has been saying that we are prioritizing criminals and sort of people who are already in detention pending criminal charges, the worst of the worst, quote unquote.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. The reality is that that's a very limited subset of the amount of undocumented people in this country. I don't think you'd crack more than maybe 100,000 people who have violent criminal charges in the United States who have not been deported if they were undocumented and charged with a crime. It's a very limited subset of people. They're usually already in registries. Miller's response was basically are you stupid? Why would you believe that? And he yells at them, and several people who were in this meeting, I believe, then talked to Axios about it and tells them that they need to start going to the Home Depots, to, construction sites, and just grabbing everyone they can. And that reflects the reality. As much as this administration claims that what they are doing is targeting criminal illegal migrants, the reality is that to Stephen Miller, everyone who is undocumented in this country, not even outright undocumented, everyone who's an asylum seeker, anyone who's on temporary protected status, even people who are here legally with residencies and work permits, they are criminal migrants in his view. Because his worldview is not informed by a deep belief that people should respect the immigration process. It is a fundamentally racist, ethno-nationalist worldview. For him, it's not about rebuilding the American immigration system into something that is, I'm the child of immigrants. It took my mother almost 30 years to get her citizenship in the United States, despite being the mother of like 3 American citizens and married to a dual national. The immigration system in the United States is horrendous. It's not functional. This administration is not interested in building a functional immigration system.
Nope.
It's interested in purging the nation of those that they consider other, of non-white people who they can get their hands on. And the category of people that they can get their hands on to deport is going to expand as much as we let it. And that's the thing that gets me, where it was, we're going to start with the undocumented people. Now they're revoking TPS. They're rounding up people who have residencies and deporting them to random countries.
They're trying to undo birthright citizenship.
They're trying to undo birthright citizenship. The category of quote unquote undesirables in Miller's eyes is going to keep expanding as far as he can get away with. And the problem is that he has control of the 3 major, effective control of the 3 federal agencies that give him the power to do that. The Supreme Court has been captured. Congress is completely compliant. And the president is just happy to sign the paper.
And, folks who joined us, the 1,200 people, I'm talking to Rolling Stone's reporter, Nikki McCann Ramirez, who is one of the co-authors of a fantastic profile of Stephen Miller and what I call the Stephen Miller presidency. I'm going to link to it in the Rolling Stones. Strongly recommend you subscribe to the Rolling Stones, doing some fantastic journalism. I'm not paid to say that. And just to read that piece, because it's really good. And I've been all over Stephen Miller, as you know. Anyone who's an expert on Stephen Miller, please come on the show. Because if you really need to understand the end game, you have to understand Stephen Miller. If you really want to understand why they're unleashing the National Guard, you have to understand Stephen Miller. If you really want to understand why they want to undo birthright citizenship, you have to understand Stephen Miller. If you want to understand where they're going to go, in my opinion, and I've said it before, is martial law, you have to listen to Stephen Miller, who has used words like insurrection and invasion. And who says we can suspend habeas corpus rights because I'm invoking the Alien Enemies Act. Can you talk to us about his endgame?
I think the endgame, it is a bit unclear. I do think at a certain point he might try a suspension of habeas corpus, even if it is for a limited subset of people. I think something like a declaration of martial law, the ingredients, the circumstances would have to be very specific for them to get away with it. But at the end of the day, the end goal for Miller, for a lot of people in this administration, for sort of the true believers of his type, is a white Christian America. It is an America.
But he's Jewish, Nikki. He's Jewish. How can a person who's Jewish also be white nationalist? How?
We also mentioned it in the piece. He has an uncle, a Jewish uncle, who's straight up this man has abandoned virtually every principle of the Jewish faith. And I'm not going to be the arbiter of Stephen Miller's religion, but this is also kind of why some people like Miller, or Republicans who are really into Israel will say Judeo-Christian values. Yeah. So there's a little overlap there, but that's the end goal. Because we also can't forget that the right has a lot of really intense anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that they haven't fully managed to extricate themselves of. But the end goal is the creation of sort of Judeo-Christian ethno-state that prioritizes white people. It's a very. It got memeified a little bit, but if you look back at the Project 2025 document, it's the vision of a state where sort of the rights of women and minorities are quite limited. They're relegated to second-class citizenship, where you know, the white conservative male is the dominant social class in this country. And Miller, I think, for all the directionality that his policies are giving to this vision, I think what needs to be understood is, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, he has been this person since he was a teenager.
There you go.
This is a vision that he has been cultivating since probably like the late 90s, early 2000s. This is a man who came of age in one of the most like traumatic times in American history and decided that the problem wasn't the people who'd actually done the thing, it was the community around him. And that he needed to reshape his community to fit the vision that he wanted, to fit his own priorities and his own political goals. And he doesn't really care who or what he has to fuck over to make that happen. And that's the scariest thing about all this, that you hear the stories from people who know him. You hear about how he talks to people who put up resistance. You hear about how he's changed from the first to the second Trump administration. And it's abundantly clear that this man has no brakes. There is no check. There is no one around him that'll say, actually, no, you cannot do that. He will. And this was entirely the strategy of America First Legal. He will continue to push and push and push and throw shit at the wall to see what sticks. And the thing is, even if a court says 4 or 5 months down the line, no, you can't do that, the damage has already been done. There are still hundreds of Venezuelans in Secot who have not been extracted from that prison. They've managed to get a handful of people out. They managed to get Guillermo Garcia out. They managed to get several other people out. But people are still being deported to third-party nations with little due process. People are still being held in inhumane detention camps. People are still being rounded up and disappeared without notice to their families, being scooped up from immigration courts. There was a absolutely devastating anecdote from an immigration lawyer about a father who had to be like physically separated from his daughter because I showed up at immigration court to arrest him. Stephen Miller is inflicting very real pain and suffering on families and individuals all over this country. And by every account we have, he is enjoying it, and there's no one around to stop it.
And let me just tell you some breaking news. If everyone who's joining us thought we were being hyperbolic, and anyone who watches The Left Hook, who I've always said that they're going to use this as a rack-stack fire moment to crack down on liberals, over the weekend, Stephen Miller said, quote, "The last message that Charlie Kirk gave to me before he joined his creator in heaven was he said that we have to dismantle and take on the radical left organizations in this country that are fomenting violence. That was the last message that he sent me, and we're going to do that," end quote. Breaking news as of now. JD Vance, because totally normal, has taken over Charlie Kirk's
Yeah.
Turning Point USA show, hosting it, and has announced that we're going to go after NGO networks and we're going to go after the left.
And it's interesting because Turning Point USA was kind of like a nonprofit network. I think it started as a nonprofit, and it started as sort of this, activist group that was funded by conservative billionaires. It's kind of beating a dead horse, but the sheer rank hypocrisy of this administration can never be undersold. Like,
This is what Hitler did. The Reichstag fire was
yeah.
used as an emergency to consolidate power. Germany gave power to Hitler, who then declared martial law and became a dictator. And the fact that you're seeing J.D. Vance do it, because I don't think Donald Trump realizes it, J.D. Vance has been groomed by Peter Thiel to assume power. Trump is not well. Now, this is the thing where folks, and Nicole, I wanted to ask you this real quick, and thank you for joining us. I'm just throwing this out there. I don't think JD Vance has it. No matter how hard they try to make him it, he's like the analogy I've given, and I'm an old man, is when I saw Transformers the movie in 1986, they killed Optimus Prime. It made me cry. And then they tried to make Rodimus Prime into Optimus Prime. And we're like, we don't care about Rodimus Prime. Rodimus Prime is corny. We want Optimus Prime. And I feel like JD Vance is Rodimus Prime. They're trying to make him into something that he's not, which is why he's the one who's taking over Charlie Kirk's thing right now and is making this address. But what they're forgetting to tell you, folks, is Charlie Kirk in the past couple of weeks. You know what he said? Release the Epstein files. Over 80% of Americans want the release of the Epstein files, including Republicans, including MAGA. They're trying to distract. I don't think they will. And they're trying to make JD Vance into a thing. I don't think they will. And the economy is going to get worse. And this is also why it's so scary, is because as they know that Trump is dying, they're trying to consolidate all this power into the hands of Stephen Miller and Russell Vought and JD Vance to crack down on the rest of us. That's my take. Your take.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think JD Vance has the juice. I really don't. Just and I think that's why this administration is as effective as it is, because I can't, like, as a journalist, I can't speculate on the president's health issues. I do think the signs that he is unwell are there. Um, but he's still, like, pretty charismatic. He's still the front-facing figure of this made-for-TV administration. And, Stephen Miller loves being on TV. JD Vance loves being on TV. They're kind of weird guys. And you watch
Yep.
them talk, and it gives you a weird and icky feeling. When Trump is out of the picture, either I think the end result is going to be sort of like a very, very intense, very, and not violent, like in the, like, they're going to be punching and kicking each other, but like a very aggressive fight for dominance over who gets to lead the MAGA movement. And if that
I agree.
doesn't pan
I agree.
out, does the MAGA movement survive without Donald Trump?
I think
Like,
damage.
I don't see a clear successor.
I think there'll be much generational damage to America already has been done to our institutions, to our democracy, to our reputation, to innocent people, transgender people, immigrant people, brown people, black people, women, our rights.
Yeah.
And I think MAGA will eat MAGA. I think the
Yeah.
only thing that can destroy MAGA is not the corporate institutions who've bent the knee, not the billionaires who are complicit, not the tech bros who are complicit, not the corporate lawyers who are complicit, not Democrats who, in my opinion, are spineless and haven't met the moment. Spent the last month, instead of talking about Donald Trump and JD Vance, they've beat up Zoran Mamdani. I think MAGA will eat MAGA. And my
Oh,
proof
yeah.
and my thesis on that is it was a right-wing former MAGA white guy who tried to kill Trump. It was a white dude from a Trumper family who used Groyper language. That's what we know so far. Who allegedly he was a shooter, right? Who killed Charlie Kirk. And you see that Charlie Kirk isn't right wing enough for the Groypers. You're seeing splits in MAGA when it comes to Epstein. And once Trump goes, you're going to see a Julius Caesar moment where Russell Vaught's going to go for power,
Yeah.
Stephen Miller's going to go for power, Elon Musk's going to go for power, and Stephen Miller's an out white nationalist, but Russell Vaught's a Christian nationalist, and Elon Musk is a white supremacist, techno fascist. So all these
Yeah.
guys are going to come together. But I think what unites them all is they want this country to be a country for white, rich, powerful men.
Yeah. No, they want this country to be a place where their word and their beliefs and their vote matters more than the popular will. Like that's really it. They, like, the techno fascism, the white Christian nationalism, it is, all of these ideologies are inherently exclusionary. They are all ideologies that are inherently more akin to a monarchy or an aristocracy than a functional democracy. And that's the end goal.
I think that's the end goal, folks. This is scary stuff. This is the vice president of the United States right now, literally taking over Charlie Kirk's podcast. Totally normal. We're run by shit posters, essentially. We're run by a friggin' mediocre podcast host who has effectuated what Stephen Miller openly said and warned about just 2 days ago. And he has essentially declared war on the left. He is rewriting history. He is gaslighting America. He's going to go after the left and its organizations and institutions. They're going for martial law. And the person who's the general, the commander, the lieutenant is Stephen Miller. I call him President Stephen Miller. Others have said he's a shadow president. I think there's a fantastic um, a piece that was written in the Rolling Stones. One of the co-authors is my fabulous guest for the first time. Nicole, come back anytime. Everyone loves you. You got so many hearts.
Happy to be on.
Nikki McCann Ramirez is one of the co-authors of this great piece in the Rolling Stones that came out over the weekend that just does a deep dive into what I call the Stephen Miller presidency. Strongly recommend reading it. Nikki, shamelessly promote yourself.
So Nikki McCann Ramirez on Blue Sky, Instagram. I like to sometimes use Twitter, but not really anymore. And then I host a podcast called American Friction. Episodes drop every Monday and Friday.
Thank you, Nick, for watching. And see, I'm going to do it properly. Nikki McCann Ramirez. Ramirez.
Ramirez. See.
Ramirez. Nikki McCann Ramirez. I thought I tried. I
Thank
was
you
pretty
so
good there.
much.
Thank you,
That
Nikki,
was
and thank
good.
you to Quinn for recommending you folks. I'll have the link up when we do the write up for the 1,700 people, 1,500 people joining us late. Talking to again Nikki McCann Ramirez, who is one of the co-authors of this fantastic piece on Stephen Miller. Really does a deep dive. What radicalized him, his worldview, how he operates, how people think he's a freak, how he works harder than everyone else, how he's essentially controlling the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and what was the third one?
The DOJ.
The DOJ, his end game. And folks, everything that they wrote about literally today. Just look at it today. Look what JD Vance came out and said, echoing what Stephen Miller threatened over the weekend. They're using Charlie Kirk's death as a Reichstag fire moment, and meanwhile, we still have Democrats mocking and ridiculing Zoran Mamdani. It's we're in it, folks. Be educated, be informed, take care of yourselves. It's the left hook. There are no paywalls ever. Everything is free. Please become a free subscriber. If you have a few bucks, become a paid subscriber. At the very least, be informed and support Nikki and her article. Follow her on Blue Sky. Listen to her podcast. I'll link it up. Nikki, send me the link to your podcast. I'll have it up tonight. And we've been talking about President Stephen Miller and his white nationalist endgame. But we have the numbers. In order to realize it, he's going to have to go through the rest of us. So, folks, 10 toes down. Fight for democracy. It's on. Be kind, be decent, and don't be a fascist. Take care, Nikki.
You too.